Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Killer Gene's Stripped Down, where we talk about everything true crime and then some.
You'll hear about the cases that are close to us and go behind the scenes of true crime reporting.
We'll also talk about case updates and breaking news, as well as speak with some of our friends and colleagues in the world of true crime.
Now, we're going to be sharing things we've never been able to talk about because certainly inappropriate to post online, but this is the platform that we can finally share it, what really happens when gathering true crime stories.
So, let's get to it. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Killer Gene's Stripped Down. Our guest today, he is a California gem. He's a legend. He's never lost a murder or sexual assault trial. In fact, he's won about 130 jury trials in a row during his career as Orange County's Deputy District Attorney. And now he's in private practice. You know him, you love him, and he's pretty easy on the eyes. Matt Murphy, welcome to Killer Gene Stripped Down.
Well, happy to be here. I think my mom would actually endorse all of that, but she may be the only one. So thank you.
And all of the 2020 listeners and viewers, I should say.
Yeah, I don't know. I gotta get more hip with social media. Actually, start following some of this stuff. I'm kind of ignorant of all this. And the truth is, I hate the sound of my own voice, so I have a hard time watching any of the shows. So usually when I dial in, all I see is sun damage on the screen. So, yeah, I would not be on my own fan list.
It's funny because you're always on. I have friends that will, text me, I've seen Matt again. But I have a question. You've been a lifelong prosecutor, right? What was the transition like for you to go from prosecutor to defense?
Well, it was a trip. I was a DA for 26 years. I spent 17 in the homicide unit. And one of the things is you get your own team. So down there, I had my own cities. I had Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Laguna, and Irvine. I had my own full-time investigator who I loved. I had my own paralegal, and it was like these really fascinating, dynamic days. The way we do it in Orange County is it's called a vertical unit. So with those cities, you start the night of the murder. So you get the call out. You go in the middle of the night. You walk the scene before they move the body. You actually are there. Murder scenes are like time capsules. So whatever's happening at the time of the murder, the killer always runs out of the house if it's inside a house. So if there's disco music playing, it's playing when you're in there. If there's candles burning, they're still burning. So it's like this. It's almost everything's frozen, and then there's your victim. So as a prosecutor down there, you work it from the ground up. Literally, you're there in the middle of the night helping them with the warrants, and it's like this gigantic three-dimensional puzzle. And I'm probably a little twisted here, but I found it absolutely fascinating from the very first one that I did. And it's like sometimes the puzzle solves because the bad guy is three houses down hiding in the bushes, which actually happened to me once. I'm trying to find parking. And I literally stopped my car probably 10 feet away from a guy with a big old knife. But a lot of them take decades to solve, especially with DNA and all that. And that's what they are. They're kind of puzzles. But then after you leave the scene, which are always fascinating, you meet the families. You meet the families of the murder victims, and that injects kind of the enormity of it and the responsibility of it, because you have these people who lost a loved one, and of all the arc of human experience, we go through breakups, we have health scares. The only thing worse than losing a loved one to disease is losing somebody that you love to some selfish person who's killed them for fun or killed them for greed, or and the degree of suffering and loss is unfathomable unless you've gone through it. And you deal with these families, and that's really, as a DA, who you're fighting for. So as a DA, every day, I go in, and when you do it for a while, especially under the former DA down there, you're given a lot of latitude. They trust your experience. The police trust you if you've won a few of their cases, and it's the same cops over and over again. And these men and women work so hard, and so you get this, you get kind of a little fiefdom, and you're going to bat for these families, these horribly bereaved moms who lost their sons, or husbands who lost their wives, or you have about 25 different murder cases on your caseload at any given time, and some are very high profile. Some of them there's no media on it at all, but the family breaks your heart because of everything they're going through. So I went from that, and then I got an offer from a major news outlet to go do some commentary for them, which was a really good offer. And the thing about, if you're doing those murders right, or you're doing that job right, it can be kind of consuming. So you get calls out Thanksgiving. I think I had 2 or 3 Thanksgiving murders in a row where I had to leave in the middle of dinner. Had an old girlfriend whose birthday, I took her out to the desert for her birthday. There's a restaurant out there she liked out in La Quinta, and I get a call from Costa Mesa. I've got a really crazy double homicide, and I had to go. I had to help my cops. So the transition, I think, is way better for relationships, but I left in August of 2019, tried big cases back to back, and went to the Maldives with buddies, went on a golf trip, came home, and COVID hit. So the transition has been bizarre. The cases, I've enjoyed doing criminal more than I thought I would, because especially on the low end, I'm dealing mostly with nice people who've gotten in trouble, that can afford to pay me, frankly, which you don't really get as a DA. So, but it's a transition I'm still very much in, and I'm still trying to sort out how this is going to be when COVID's done. And I mean, as a DA, what you do is you fight bullies. You fight bullies. The people who commit murders, almost always they're bullies, whether they're a husband that kills a wife, whether it's a robbery, they're bullies. And I've been doing that since I was in 4th grade, right? For better or worse. And I'm learning that in private practice. I've got some employment cases, and I'm doing some pro bono stuff. And there's plenty of bullies out here that just aren't charged with crimes. So it's like, in a way, I feel like I'm doing the exact same job. On the other hand, I really desperately miss my team and the people that I worked with. So, sorry, long answer to a simple question.
Matt, I always ask this of people in law enforcement or people in the legal and justice system like yourself, because you talked about this a little bit, when getting to know the families. How do you keep yourself separate? How do you not get emotionally attached to a case, to a victim, to a family member?
I would love to be able to answer that in the right way. The truth is you don't. You do get emotionally attached. Now, the trick is, where you have to draw the line as a professional is you can never let that emotion influence any of your actual charging decisions. So, but as a human being, you can't help but have your heart break just a little bit each and every time. You just can't base prosecutorial decisions on it. In other words, like in the sexual assault unit, where I spent 4 years before I went to homicide, the majority of those are child molest cases. The majority of them are in-home child molest, where an uncle, a stepdad, whatever. And the majority of them, there's not enough evidence to proceed. And you get these little kids, and it's awful. It's one of the hardest things you can do is you got to say no. And when there isn't enough evidence, it's a tough thing, but it's part of the profession, and you got to do that. If you can't prove the case ethically, you can't proceed. And as aggressive as I might have been, there are certain cases you just can't make. So when it comes to murders, you meet with the families, and fortunately for the vast majority of those, you meet with them after you filed charges. Sometimes you meet before, but what you do is I found that it winds up being a huge motivating factor. Like when you get to know them and you like them, like, the Bill McLaughlin case, for example, that was a Newport Beach murder in 1994. This guy invented a machine to separate plasma from blood. So here's this pharmaceutical genius that really contributed to modern medical science, and we still use that technology today. And even though they had a lot of money, his daughters are two of the nicest people I've ever met. And that was a cold one and took 15 years, but you bond with them. And then you get to know them, you understand their grief. And then when you feel tired at 10 o'clock at night and you get another 20 pages to read, when you bonded and you actually kind of let them touch your heart a little bit, you read that extra 20 pages and you go to sleep at 1 o'clock instead. And you let it fuel you. You don't let it make your decisions for you. But when it comes to the hard work of actually prevailing in those cases and making sure that the horrible human being that's responsible for the murder of their father, or in that case, two human beings, you grind it out at 3 a.m. You make sure you get it done. You read that extra report. You read the, one more expert opinion that the defense is trying to propose. You go over the cell phone records just one more time, and in those late hours and those details, that's where you find the zinger, and that's how you win the tough ones. And so, yeah, you don't really. I think the best prosecutors, look, fundamentally, it's all about caring. As cliche as that might sound, like what the families need to know. And I'd always meet with the families, after we'd file. I'd have a meeting with my investigator and my paralegal. Like I said, I miss them so much. But what they want to hear is that somebody cares, and it's like when you're there and you kind of help them through their grief a little bit, even if it's just explaining the process that they're going to go through. When you meet them and you look them in the eye and they know they've got a champion and they know they've got an advocate and somebody is going to fight for their son or their daughter who was murdered. That's, I think, in one hand, it's the most difficult part of being a professional prosecutor, but in the other, it is far and away the most rewarding, and some people don't do it. There's a lot of prosecutors that don't do it. So, families can be emotional. It can be a pain. I always gave them my personal cell number, and you know what? I can say I never regretted doing that. I've never had anybody abuse it. A lot of people are afraid to do that. But then I'll tell you what, at the end of those, the hard fought battles, the ones that are close, the ones where the cold cases where you just aren't going to get any more evidence and the guy did it, those are the ones that when you bring those home and the jury convicts and you go out into the hallway and you get a hug from a mom, it's like heroin. And for me, it was a total addiction. And, I've got plenty of ex-girlfriends and failed relationships to prove it. But I kind of lived for that for a long time. You become a warrior on behalf of your victims and the family, if that makes sense without sounding too corny.
You are a justice warrior. I mean, sad about the personal effects, but we need people in society like you.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. The funny thing is that having done it that way, anybody who passes up on that, like some of my colleagues were just, everybody has their own style, but I always thought they were depriving themselves of some of the most rewarding experiences in life. Truly, I had a case. There's been no media on it. It was my Matthew Large murder. It dealt with it was a marijuana murder way back in the day. It was a 22-year-old kid who got murdered over a $12,000 marijuana debt, and they buried him on a beach up in Humboldt County. And his father was the real deal. This guy was used to be in a biker club, and he was jumped on a beach up in it's a place called Stinky Beach, ironically enough, outside of Eureka, and murdered in Irvine, transported the body up there, buried it in the beach. The family had no idea what had happened, and the dad went on a hunt. He went on a hunt to kill the guy who did it, and he was on the lam for a long time. And for the first 6 months of that investigation, he was ahead of us, and we figured that. And he was so distraught over what happened. And this guy was a biker, and he cleaned up. He had a family, but this was a hardcore blue collar dude. And when we got the convictions, one of the best defense lawyers I've ever tried a case against, a guy named Jeremy Goldman, and it was essentially the defense was, look, my son did it. I got rid of the body, but I did not commit the murder, because the relationship was between the two sons, these two guys that are 22 years old, and it was a great defense. And it was one of those where he took the stand. And we broke him on cross, which is, I'm happy to go into the details if you want to hear, but it was one of those 2-day cross-examination, and he made a single mistake that I got him on. And anyway, that trial finishes up, we go into the hallway, and Tony Large, the dad, so this is a guy he was affiliated with the Hells Angels for a while, I think. And I don't want to say anything that, hurts his reputation. He's a wonderful man. And I was really impressed with him. I think he ran with the Hells Angels. Anyway, he came over and I said, Mr. Large, it was an honor trying this case on behalf of your son. And he wrapped his arms around me and he cried on the lapel of my suit and he just kept saying, no me, no me, no me. Like, no, it's my honor. And I had Hell's Angel slobber on my suit. But that's the job of a prosecutor. And then, those poor people, they thought nobody would care about their son because he was, he was 22. He made a couple mistakes. He was, he's in the marijuana world. He's in the marijuana business. And, now that's legal in the state of California. But back then they figured the police won't care, and nobody's going to want to do this. And we had a dedicated detective that was phenomenal. And we put that together and we won that trial and that family got justice at the end, and it's moments like that, the crying mom in the hallway, the hugs, and then you just can't wait to go do it again. And my problem is my original plan is I was going to be a deputy DA for about 3 years, learn how to try cases, and then go into the private practice and make money, whatever that is, right? Like learn how to try cases and go make money. And 26 years later, I was still like shooting up the heroin with mom hugs, and the thing is that the more cases you do, the more skill you accumulate, and the more comfortable you get on the tough ones, and the judges get to know you, and the more power you have to make your point, you get more skillful in front of juries, and it's like your skill set continues to improve, so the cases that you're willing to take a chance on get harder and more interesting and thinner, and it's like it really is almost like an addiction where it takes more to get that same high. It takes a harder case. It takes a tougher victim. It takes, you keep challenging yourself. And, that's one of the problems that you see like with George Gascon now in Los Angeles. There is no philosophy towards the tougher case. It's completely different. It's about, how can we make this better on the murderer? How can we make this better on the guy who committed the crime? How can we make sure he spends the least amount of time in prison? How can we make sure that we're dismissing all the enhancements? And it is a completely upside down view of what a prosecutor is supposed to do.
Let's break this down for people so they understand. And also coming from a lifelong prosecutor, what to go after charge-wise and what not to. And if people don't know listening to this around the world, LA is in complete turmoil right now with a flood of headlines of random killings, many by homeless, to home invasions and targeted crime sprees. Now in our popular areas of Beverly Hills, who just voted to recall him, and West Hollywood. And our current stats, LA is now at a 15-year high in homicides. And you, Matt Murphy, are known for going after high-profile leaders. I mean, literally eating corrupt leaders for breakfast is what I say. So, when it comes to District Attorney George Gascon, whose own people are saying he's soft on criminals, is he what's being called a woke advocate, looking after over-sentencing, which is an issue, or is he just annihilating a justice system that is affecting all of us?
Yeah, look, right now we are so politicized as a country that it seems like everybody feels like they've got to pick a side, and when it comes to this sort of thing, this should really have nothing to do with politics. And that, like, the safety of your kids on the streets should be something that Democrats, Republicans, everybody should agree that, one of the first priorities, if not the very first priority of government, should be to keep its citizenry safe. And if you go back to ancient Rome, and I mean, the formula here is very simple. Like ancient Rome, probably even back to, Mesopotamia with the codes of Hammurabi, because the laws are all very similar. Okay, old cuneiform and clay tablets. There's a certain percentage of the population that's predatory. Whatever number you want to give it, whether it's 5%, 10%, 2%, whatever it is, every society has a certain amount of people that are just plain old bad. Okay, and it's a pretty simple formula. The more of those people you put in prison for longer periods of time, the less victims you're going to have, the less opportunity they're going to have to go out and rape and rob and kill, okay, or burn things, or kidnap folks, or, whatever it may be. Like the really bad crimes, there is a finite percentage of the population that will engage in that. There's a finite number of people that are predatory and psychopathic and that they have no empathy for human beings, or they'll pull the trigger during a robbery. Like, that's a finite number at any given time. And the more of them are unable to do it, the better it is for everybody else. Okay, so when you have somebody like George Gascon, who's an ideologue, it's not that he's soft on crime. You could have soft on crime sounds like he's got a big heart. If you review any of the interviews that George Gascon has had with victims of crime, with some of these mothers that have confronted him, I don't think he's got a big heart. I don't think he's soft on crime. I think he's motivated by ideology. And it is an adversarial justice system. That's the way it was structured. And it's been that way in one form or another for the last 400 years. And what that means is you've got a zealous advocate on one side, you've got a zealous advocate on the other, you've got a judge to mediate, and you got a jury to make the call. That's the way it's supposed to work. And it's like what Gascon is doing is no different than if you had a very rich right-wing guy. Like, a lot of this is George Soros money. Okay, so if you had a super rich right-wing guy who said, hey, we're going to prosecute everybody, I don't care if they're innocent or not, right? And I'm going to go in there and we're going to go and what we're going to do is we're going to get a really hardcore right-wing guy to get appointed to be the public defender. And we're going to get him to sign up all these people, whether they're guilty or not, for these lengthy prison sentences. And it's hacking the system. It would be undoing it. It undoes the fundamental nature of the adversarial process. And that is exactly what George Gascon is. He is an ideologically based defense lawyer who's in the position where his job is to prosecute crimes, and he's refusing to do it. And let me give you a quick example. One of the families that I represent is a sheriff's deputy. He was a sergeant named Steve Owen. And this was a guy who was famous in his area, in the Lancaster area of Los Angeles, for community outreach. Like, he was everything that we want a police officer to be and more. And a famous example is there was some kid that he'd arrested a couple times. And he's in the back of the police car, and he was a juvenile, they got talking, long drive to juvenile hall or whatever, and talked to him a couple times, and he liked him. And he finally said, why are you doing this? What, to the kid, like, why are you engaged in this stupid petty crime when you should be in school? And he said, I don't have a way to get to school. Like, the bus comes here, I got to walk there. He goes, I'll make a deal with you. And he drove him to school every day for an entire year, bought him new shoes too. Okay, Steve Owen, Sergeant Steve Owen of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Okay, this is like one of the stories you don't hear right now in like this big wave against police. And so he's on patrol one day, and he gets a call of a burglar in progress, and he rolls up, and he's solo. There's another backup officer who's on his way, and somehow, despite all his firearms training, and these days happen, the burglar comes out. He's got a stolen firearm, manages to get the drop on Sergeant Owen, and he shoots him, and he disables him, knocks him on his back. He is out of the fight, but he's not dead. So he's been shot. He's down, and rather than run away, what this guy does, and this guy was a hardened, documented gang member who'd been to state prison multiple times, had multiple strikes. Instead of just fleeing the scene, he walked over, he stood above Sergeant Steve Owen, and he shot him 3 times in the face and once in the badge. And he executed him. Then he got behind the patrol car, and right as the other deputy was pulling up, and he tried to run that other deputy over with Steve Owen's patrol car. And then he ran into a house, and he took two teenagers hostage. Okay? So the way that works, sentence-wise, look, in the 70s and 80s, in California, we had very soft sentencing things. And I could talk to that for a long time, but we passed a bunch of reforms in response to all the serial killers that were running around in the 70s and 80s, all of the soft on crime policies that we had, all these like revolving door things, because what happened was the community realized that they were suffering and people were getting hurt because we're being soft on all that stuff. So we passed all these reforms. 3 strikes was a reform, incredibly misunderstood because it actually works. A lot of people don't understand how it works. And I did those cases for a long time, and we could go into that 3 strikes got crime down, and it worked, and it was not unfair to the criminals. Okay. But this guy had multiple strikes, this defendant. He was a gang member. He used a gun. So there are all these enhancements available. So under Jackie Lacey, who I know, who was a wonderful DA in my opinion, and a nice lady, lifelong Democrat, black woman, as pro-prosecution as you get, everybody that I know loved her. And but she wasn't left enough for apparently the voters that backed George Gascon. Okay. And so Gascon comes in with these sweeping policies announcing we are no longer going to pursue strikes. We're no longer going to file gun enhancements. We're no longer filing gang enhancements. So he comes into this sweeping one-size-fits-all edict where all of those enhancements are going to go away. Okay, that's ideological. That's not based on the law. And by the way, that's not progressive. Progressive means we're going forward. That stuff takes us right back to where we were before these reforms were passed. And we know where that gets us. That gets us increased crime on the streets. That gets us more murders, more rapes, more burglaries, less safety for innocent people, less safety for innocent kids. We've been here before. We know what happens, and we're watching it happen again. So in that particular case, here's this bereaved family. This police officer, who was a good man, had been executed by a documented gang member, multiple striker, with a stolen firearm. Okay, so under the George Gascon edicts, what does that mean? That means we got no gun enhancement, we have no gang enhancement, and we have no strikes. Okay, and there's a special circumstance for that murder, because it was a murder of a police officer in the performance of his duties, which should have made the case life without possibility of parole as a matter of statutory minimum in the state of California. So with the Gascon edicts, what happens when you get rid of all that means that if that case goes to trial, the jury is going to get instructed on second-degree murder. Okay, so a good hard-fought defense, hey, look, maybe he's just defending himself from this cop, and you can just hear the arguments on that. Jury compromises. It's entirely foreseeable that they come back with a second-degree murder. With none of those enhancements, the guy had already been in prison or in jail for 4 years. It took us another year or two to get it to trial. Under the policies of George Gascon, that man would have been released after about 6 years in state prison. Okay, it is absolutely outrageous. I'll debate George Gascon any day of the week. I'll debate Max Zebos, his media guy. They want to prop up any of the public defenders they've hired. I will point out to any audience, anytime, anywhere, how massively, massively wrong that is. And I'm sorry, you murder a police officer like that, you shouldn't do 6 years in state prison. You should die in state prison, in my opinion. And I think most people in Southern California agree with me on that. And I really do. The problem is there's a gap between the well-meaning voters and the understanding of what people like George Gascon do and what their philosophy is. And I'll tell you what, it is awful. Another thing is, they profess to want to, help these minority communities. A lot of these gang members, I live in Manhattan Beach, they're not coming to Manhattan Beach when they're getting released early from prison, guys. They're going right back to the communities from where they came, where there's little kids that are trying to go to school. They're preying on the same people that George Gascons in the world kind of cynically say they want to help. And I'll tell you what, I bet you if you took an honest poll from any of those neighborhoods, they would want those guys in prison more than anybody. So their kids can walk home safely, so their houses don't get broken into, so their girlfriends and wives don't get raped, and so they don't get friggin' murdered in robberies. And this, again, this doesn't have to do anything with politics. This is human beings wanting safety from their government. And look, when George Gascon was the DA in San Francisco, and I don't know the exact timing of the overlap, but I've seen the FBI statistic on this. The FBI statistic, property crime, after that philosophy was applied in San Francisco. So this is things like, things getting stolen off your porch, your house getting broken into, your car getting broken into, petty theft, quality of life stuff, what Giuliani in New York would have called the broken window crimes, right? That sort of thing went up 630% in the city of San Francisco inside of 4 years. And that's exactly what we're seeing in LA right now. When the bad guys know they will not be prosecuted for petty theft, that's when you wind up with, and look, I'm a defense lawyer now, guys. This is I defend people who are in trouble. that's where you wind up with these mobs that go in and break into these stores, because it's a group of people who understand there's stuff that we can steal. And the worst thing that happens is we're not getting prosecuted, because we're going to go into some woke DA, and the DA up there in San Francisco, sorry, he's horrible. And he won't prosecute it because it's all about the criminal instead of the victim. And it's look, I've never understood the extreme right and their apparent anti-pension to environmental stuff. I'm a surfer. Like I belong to two different environmental organizations. Like I've never understood why the far right can't figure out a way to like make, be friendlier to the environment. I have never understood the far left's love of criminals and disdain for victims. I don't get it.
What do we do at this point? Because, the recalls, I don't think they work. I mean,
too many people are ignorant, right? So, but I think what we do, guys, honestly, I think we do this. I think we do podcasts. I think we get fortunately, the LA Times does not have a monopoly anymore on the information that voters are receiving. So hopefully a lot of people listen to your podcast and understand this. It's like, this stuff is awful and it's bad for everybody. And another thing is, there's this myth out there that somehow, these guys they're all victims of abuse. I'm referring to the bad guys here, that there was something that must have happened to them. And if only they were a little bit more loved and like all that, it's nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. There are plenty of guys that have gotten in trouble and done terrible things that aren't horrible human beings. That certainly exists. And you know what? I'm all for, rehabilitation when it comes to those guys. But when it comes to the people that are born bad, that like to prey on other human beings, the denial that those people exist is an absolute travesty as far as the safety of the community that people like George Gascon are sworn to protect. And it's like they almost refuse to acknowledge that they're not victims of something, like that they haven't been, discriminated against in some way, or that weren't abused as a child. And that's what really made them do it. And I'll tell you guys, part of my job, I would do parole hearings. And I would go up, I've done dozens and dozens of them. When you go on these lifer hearings and you look at what some of these murderers have done, and look, there are guys up there who it was situational. It's a bar fight, or it's a dispute a fight that got out of hand, and they're remorseful and they regret, and they're never going to commit another crime. When it comes to those guys, it's like, yeah, you know what? Let them out. They're not going to hurt anybody. Or even some of the young gangsters, the kid in the back seat who's 15 years old during the drive-by, and somebody gets killed and he goes in. Like, I think a lot of those guys have a chance, But the shooter, the ringleader, the guy that thinks it's fun, the guy that organizes it, the guy that has made affirmative decisions to engage in a life of criminal activity because he enjoys it, so he can get the tattoos. There's this thing that gang members, everybody in these neighborhoods has to join a gang. It's bullshit. Like, look, my lead on the Wozniak case, that's the actor that cut off his neighbor's head, and that's a whole other story. Like, my lead is a guy named Jose Morales, and look, he's a police officer. He's one of the finest human beings I've ever met. He grew up in the worst part of Santa Ana and had guys shooting at him when he was a kid. And there's a lot of pressure on, they call him paisanos. He was born in Mexico, and he came up, and from the kids that were born here in the gang culture, there's a lot of pressure to kind of the guys from Mexico they get a tough time from the established gang members that are here. I mean, he was shot at, and he became one of the finest, most dedicated police officers. And it's like my old colleague Larry Yellen, I watched him do a trial once, and it was they were talking about this guy's supposed abusive childhood. Yet he had two brothers and sisters that were amazingly successful, and he put a picture of Hurricane Katrina up. And he's like, okay, so here's Hurricane Katrina, same storm, and he had pictures of looters and pictures of people saving their neighbors, and it was like, it's like the difference here is individual choice. Same storm, same area, they're exposed to the same horrible things, but some people choose to save their neighbors, and some people choose to go to the Walmart and steal everything they can. And that is an individual thing, and it's the same thing with those neighborhoods. Just because you're in a bad neighborhood does not mean you have to be a bad person. And it may be tougher, but a good person is going to figure out a way to make the right decisions. And those that make the wrong decisions and choose to join a gang, I'm sorry, but there is outplaced sympathy for those guys among a lot of the Gascon type, you use the word woke prosecutors. It's just, they're wrong. They're wrong about that. And, And not all gang members are irredeemable. Those young guys, backseat, whatever, and young men make mistakes. But there's a certain percentage of those guys that are fundamentally predatory. There's no redeeming them. They enjoy hurting other people. And I'll tell you right now with these new policies in California, we've got there's all these early release programs, right? There's all these early release programs that are being applied. I represent police officers, and I have 5 officer-involved shootings in Costa Mesa, and it's the same exact. It's a different guy, yet it's the same guy in every one of them. It's an early release from prison, documented gang ties. They're on heroin because heroin is making a raging comeback right now. They're on heroin. They're high as a kite. They've got some sort of weapon, and they get shot by the police. And let me tell you, all 5 of the shootings are clean as can be, 100%. I almost defy anybody in the Attorney General's office or in the DA's office down there to take a shot at one of my cops, because there's not a jury in the world that would convict any of them. The most recent one, quick story, this woman, and I probably shouldn't go into too much detail because it's still pending, but she responds to a, quote, fight at a 7-Eleven, and it's one of these early release guys. His car, he hit something in his car. He is high as a kite, and she hears screaming, and on the mic, our camera gets around the counter at the 7-Eleven. This guy is standing above the 7-Eleven clerk. He stabbed him multiple times. She's a police officer, says, drop the knife. He looks at her, and he stabs the clerk right on camera. That guy should never have been out of state prison. He's on an early release program, got right back on the drugs, crashed into something in his car, and the dispute with the clerk started because it's called on the nod. He's so high on heroin, he fell asleep at the register on his feet. So he goes up to pay, and he passes out, standing there. And the clerk's like, dude, you can't really sleep here. And it's kind of weird that you're sleeping on your feet. And when he arouses him, he's in a rage. The knives come out, the stabbing starts. This is what's going on in the streets right now because of that. And it's like, I think if more people were educated, if more people saw and understood what George Gascon is doing and how awful it is, I don't think I grew up in LA, and I have faith that if people knew, they would vote back in somebody like Jackie Lacey, who I think was a great DA, or Steve Cooley before her, who was a fantastic DA, and actually somebody that's going to apply the laws and fight for the victims, and do so fairly and not overcharge, and make sure the investigations are done right, and dismiss counts where, the defense presents evidence to the contrary, and have an open mind and do all the stuff you're supposed to do as a prosecutor. Remember, fundamentally as a prosecutor, your job is to be fair. And a lot of times that fairness says, I don't have enough evidence, even if I think the guy did it. Or I've got plenty of evidence to show he did it, but it's mitigated because this guy deserves a second chance, or he's got a lot of redeeming qualities, or he's got a drug habit that I think if he gets clean, he'll be a productive member of society and he won't hurt anybody again. That's the traditional job of a prosecutor. When you come in like George Gascon and you have blanket edicts where you're not going to apply these enhancements for anybody, and we're removing no more gang enhancements, no more gun enhancements, the people that benefit are the absolute worst. And it's a very simple formula. When those guys get out, innocent people are going to get hurt. And it's happening right now. And that's why we see the statistics that we're seeing. We're seeing this absolute spike in homicides. It's a direct result, and however much they try to wash that off, put lipstick on the pig, that's what happens when you decide that there's no bad guy that's worthy of incarceration. It means innocent people are going to suffer. And it casts their lot. George Gascon has cast his lot with the bad guys, not with the innocent people in the community that need his help and protection.
Matt, you mentioned the Wozniak case, and I want to ask you this. How do you treat a death penalty case differently? Or don't you? You try it the exact same way?
No. Well, yeah. So when it comes to death penalty cases, number one, look, in the state of California, death penalty has become symbolic, right? Like there is nobody's going to get executed in California, I don't think, ever again. But, there are certain cases where the murders are so horrific that this symbolism is appropriate anyway. And Wozniak is one of those. Daniel Wozniak is a community theater actor, for the many people listening that don't know. And he was lazy, and he wanted to figure out a way to make some money so he could take his wife on a super bitchin' honeymoon. And they're living in a community housing area in Costa Mesa across from Orange Coast Community College, where there was a lot of veterans, people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, getting their college degrees on the GI Bill. And one of them was a great kid named Sam Herr, who was at Camp Keating in Afghanistan. He saw combat, I think he was for 73 days in a row at one stretch. And that's a very famous thing. And it was kind of like the bridge too far. It was the outpost too far, and they were under constant attack. There were medals of honor that were there. He volunteered to go there, and he had friends that died. He heroically was in charge of the generators. And what the Taliban would do is if they could keep the base under fire long enough that the generators ran out of gas, it cut off the communications, so they couldn't call in airstrikes anymore. So they would shoot for hours because the fuel for the generator was stored in a different place, because you don't want the fuel to blow up where the guys are sleeping. And Sam Herr would literally run through enemy fire to get jerry cans, because he was in charge of the generators, and running through literally in the open enemy fire to make sure the generators kept running. And he came back a war hero. He's going to school, and he meets Daniel Wozniak, and he's got all this money from combat pay. So Daniel Wozniak hatches this plot that he's going to steal Sam Herr's money. But he's not just going to steal his money. He's going to get his ATM card. He's going to figure out what his PIN is, and then he's going to murder a beautiful young woman named Julie Kibuishi and make it look like Sam did it. And if he can make Sam disappear, the police will be looking for Sam. Sam will be the murderer of Julie. Nobody's any the wiser, and Daniel Wozniak will get all of the money. Okay, and like, it is absolutely twisted. So on death penalty cases, what you have to do is you have to make sure, number one, you are very, very careful about making sure the defense has all the discovery, for example, because they receive the highest level of appellate scrutiny. Now, you want to do that anyway out of fairness, especially when you're talking about, theoretically somebody being potentially executed. You want to play that straight. You want to be as upfront as you possibly can. And so you have to be very, very careful in death penalty cases to ensure fairness to the defendant, first and foremost, by providing every bit of discovery to the defense, and then really doing your best to see to it that you don't object too much and you let them run their defense, because you don't want to create appellate issues, and then you want to get it to the end and you want to argue the hell out of the case in front of the jury. So death penalty cases are more difficult. They're a lot more emotional. There's two phases. One is the guilt phase. Did the guy commit the murder? The other is, now what? Should he be condemned? Should he be executed for what he did? And there's a whole series of laws where a jury is supposed to weigh the aggravating versus mitigating factors, and pretty much it's anything goes for the defense. Any good deed they've ever done in their life is properly considered by the jury, which was the way it should be, I think. But then you bring in the victim's family and you have them talk about what the loss meant to them and how much pain they're going through. And that's kind of a death penalty in a nutshell. They're horrible. They have to be shocking. There's a whole other process to decide whether or not you're going to seek it. And in Orange County, traditionally, I don't know what Spitzer's doing, but over the years, I sat on the death penalty review committee for, I think, 13 or 14 years. We sought death in only 4%, actually less than 4% of all special circ murders that were eligible for the death penalty. So we were very, very selective about the cases that we would actually pursue. It had to be something truly shocking, like the murder of a child, or rape murders of multiple women, or in that case, murdering this poor innocent woman as a decoy to get money from a guy that, and he wanted decapitating him and cutting off his hands, like watching one too many Sopranos episodes or something. But that murder was so diabolical and horrible. That's one that would qualify.
Hey, Killer Genes listeners. So a little bit about me. I love CBD, but sometimes I feel like it's just not enough. That is until we found CBDX. They have combined CBD with Delta 8 THC, and boy, oh boy, is it a game changer.
Yeah, CBDX has really kicked it up a notch, to say the least. Their line of gummies, vapes, concentrates, even flowers are all legal and will be shipped directly to your house, which is so convenient. And take it from us, you will feel them.
Oh, absolutely, Melissa. That's why I love CBDX, because it comes right to me. And I've even had some friends try it too, and now I've got them hooked, because you absolutely feel the effects of the CBDX products.
Yeah, even my longtime THC friends said that, this gives you a powerful hit. They feel it, and they like it. It's different for CBD products. And because you will feel it, please do not drive or operate heavy machinery. Oh, and if you use CBDX, it will show up on a drug test, so as THC, so just a heads up.
So if you're ready to kick up your CBD game with added Delta 8 THC, go to CBDX.com. That's 4 letters, CBDX. And if you enter the code KILLER, you'll get 20% off and a free gift.
Your stories are so compelling, my goodness. And I really want to touch on one. It's how we met when I was with Crime Watch Daily, and so is Kelly. And I know this is one we could talk for hours about, but we want to just break it down more. Cliff Notes, just because it's gotten a lot of exposure over the years, but Hawks and De Leon, and there's so many interesting backstories with this case as well that hopefully you can share some with us. But, just give us a brief overview of the really tragic death of the Hawks and insights that came along the way in doing this.
Yeah, so this was one of my earlier trials after I rotated into the homicide unit. So this is Newport Beach. And what happened was it's this really nice couple, and they were just trying to sell their yacht. And it was he was a probation officer, so it was a yacht, but they lived on it. They didn't have a tremendous amount of money, but it was called the Well Deserved. And if you sell a house with an agent, like we all do, you buy or sell a house, I think they get it's like less than 5%, right? Commission, right? If you sell a yacht through an agent, they get like 10 to 15%. So when your yacht is your home, Tom Hawks wanted to sell it himself and save that massive percentage. And who could blame him? So he meets a guy named Skylar De Leon, who held himself out as a successful child actor, and he's very convincing. And he's rolled up in a Dodge Viper, and he brought his cute little pregnant wife holding a baby onto the boat, and they trusted him. And they went out for a sea trial, and which is basically like a test drive for a car, but they go out to sea. And Skylar brought his accountant and his buddy. The accountant's a guy named John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and his buddy is a guy named Alonzo McShane. And they overpowered the Hawks, and they forced them to sign a bunch of documents indicating that they had actually sold the boat to Skylar. And then they took him out onto the deck of the boat. They tied him to an anchor, and begging for their lives, they threw him overboard off St. Clemente Island. And their bodies were never recovered. So Skylar comes back in. He's got all these documents. We sent it to the FBI, and sure enough, it was the Hawks' signature. We had their fingerprints all over the documents. Skylar had a really good story about how they bought the boat for cash. I mean, he was incredibly convincing. But Jackie Hawks signed her name Jackie Hawk, Hawk. And somebody else went in later and filled in the S. And it was like this flare to the future, letting people know that something was wrong. And so I worked with Newport on that. We hit several dead ends, and we finally put the whole case together and wound up flipping Alonzo McShane. And we did 3 different trials. We prosecuted Skylar's wife, Jennifer De Leon, because she brought the baby on the boat, and that was deliberately done to put the Hawks at ease. We prosecuted Skylar, death penalty for him. And also, as we're investigating that whole thing, we also learned that he'd committed a murder the year before down in Mexico, a guy named John Peter Jarvie. And again, Jarvie had some back surgeries and had some opiate problems, but just his mom was so sweet. And the Hawks family were some of the nicest people I ever met. And his son Ryan is just a rock star. He was so strong, but he's just a great guy, and his brother Matt. And so, we put that thing together for that family, and we tried 3 different cases, and we won. It was a clean sweep. Jennifer De Leon got life without possibility of parole, like she deserved. She was an absolute co-conspirator and put the whole thing together with them. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's on death row today, and Skylar's also on death row, I think, and I say I think because he's transitioning right now. He's in some, I don't know exactly what hormone regimen he's on, but he is transitioning into becoming like the stuff surrounding that case. I mean, it's just, there's so much to it, and working with police officers like that, when you're there with a team and everybody, you reach that moment as a prosecutor where you're trying to put it together, you're trying to solve the pieces, and you realize it at 2 a.m. when you're getting text messages or phone calls from one of your detectives, and you realize, man, these people, men and women on our team, are doing the exact same thing that I am right now. They're obsessing over it. They're losing sleep over it. They're probably being bad boyfriends and girlfriends over it, husbands, wives, whatever. And, that was an incredible case. And, and I'm not good as I say it, provided nothing goofy happens on appeal. We got justice for that family. And that's one of the most horrific murders I've ever seen. And it's just like, that old campfire story, right? Like when we're sitting around as kids, like, what's the worst way to die? Would you rather burn to death or freeze to death? Like, should we get attacked by bears? Like we've all had that as kids, right? Well, that's answered in that case. The worst way to die is begging for your life and getting tied to an anchor and trying to figure out how to cry and hold your breath at the same time. That's literally probably the worst way a human being could die.
I'm having a panic attack thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, and also it's like you look at that, and by the way, then Skylar took to it's their home, right? This boat was their home, and he started getting rid of their life the whole way back. One of the John Kennedy grabbed a fishing pole, trolled on the way back, which is stupid because you can't troll you can't troll at night, and but he did. He fished the way home, grabbed a beer, sat there, watched the tip of the rod, waiting for that big strike, and Skylar meanwhile started rifling through the drawers and throwing. He just frisbee these family photos, lifetime awards for being a probation officer. And he had a reputation for being fair to probationers, like he was a good probation officer. Frisbee into the Pacific, here's a family photo from a special time. Don't need that. Frisbee into the Pacific. And on the way back, they got rid of pretty much everything belonging to them, and then said, hey, look, when the police asked him, they were like, hey, look, we bought the boat, and they all had the same story. And everybody was locked in, and they stuck to the same story for months until we finally broke one. And but when you're talking about in the abstract, it's one thing. But when you're talking about two actual living, breathing human beings who were loving, who were loved by their family, the way they died, and like all this planning to do this. He planned it for months. The way those people died with no provision for their suffering, and there's a moment in that where Alonzo, who we flipped, his job was to guard them. So they're duct taped, they're completely restrained, and Tom Hawks is just saying, look, just let us go. We'll give you anything you want. He's doing everything right. We'll do anything you want. We'll do anything, whatever you need, please just don't hurt my wife. Just don't hurt my wife. And she was having a really hard time with it. She's saying, I'm too young to die. She was 47 years old. I'm too young to die. I'm too young to die. And they had a grandchild in Arizona. Matt, Ryan's brother, had a baby, and that's why they were selling the boat, because Jackie had never had a chance to have kids of her own. She was a stepmom. She'd been in a motorcycle accident when she was young, so she couldn't have kids. So when she had a granddaughter, she basically raised those two boys with the mom, Dixie Hawks, who's a wonderful woman too, who talked about tragedy. She died of breast cancer in the middle of the first trial. When you're talking about that level of human devotion, and a woman like Jackie Hawks, so she's begging for her life, and there's this moment where rather than let them go, the boat goes out to sea, and the engines throttle up, and they're heading out. They're duct taped, and they're on their bed, the bed that they spent their bed for 2.5 years as they cruised around the Sea of Cortez after he retired. And they're back to back, and she's crying, and Tom Hawks is touching her hand, and he's caressing her hand as they're back to back. They're handcuffed, and he was saying, it's okay. No matter what, we're going to be together. We're going to be together. He's comforting his wife as they're going out to their death, and And these guys are watching him do that. And then they take him out on the fantail of the boat, and they're going to throw him overboard. And Tom Hawks gets a mule kick in. His legs are free enough. He almost knocks Skylar De Leon off the back of the boat. And John Kennedy, in the sucker punch to end all sucker punches, you talk about Tom Hawks at this point is a man who is blindfolded, handcuffed, and wrapped in about 20 different strands of duct tape, fighting for his wife. It's as honorable as you can get. And John Kennedy runs in and punches him in the face. And then the anchor got tied to their bindings and thrown overboard, and they crunched against the railing as they went over the side, and that was it. When you think about that kind of murder, sorry, George Gascon, I disagree. I think there are certain cases where the death penalty is appropriate, and that's one of them. They'll never be executed,
absolutely.
but sorry. When you're talking about that level of abject cruelty and human suffering, I got no sympathy. I have no sympathy for the case at all.
For Skylar De Leon, when it comes to the criminal profiles, if you will, which is interesting, and you have to get in his head, and was he the leader, and learning more about him, does lifestyle play a role in the mindset of a killer? Because, and it goes back to also this exchange. You didn't know about that, the transition, until after he was locked up, after you put him away. You found evidence of certain things, but you didn't know about that till after. Does all of that play a role? First of all, were you surprised? And did all of that play a role in why he is the way that he is, and why he became such a dark soul? Because he was married and he had a new baby, and he came along with this whole plot. How much does lifestyle play a role in actions of this?
We did have information, and we shared it with the defense, that he had consulted with a sex change operation surgeon, just so we're all clear here. We did have some information. And the defense was all provided to the defense, duly, deathly, and all that. And of course, Skylar would know what he was doing. That's the question you're asking is one of the most important ones in all of criminal justice, right? It's like it's a very natural thing to wonder. What in God's name makes these people that are so cruel? What makes them do it, right? Like what is it that makes them do it? And there is number one, there's a great line in the original Mindhunter from the 80s. With the original Buffalo Bill, and it was the sort of the prequel to Silence of the Lambs. And there's a great line in that where they're talking about how one of the killers they were after had been abused as a child, and the hero, the detective, said, what he went through as a child, I weep for him, and as an adult, I want to blow his head off. It's like. And it's basically like, as a kid, he had no choice and it's awful. But as an adult, he of all people should know how bad this is. And you can't, it's like, look, human suffering, abuse as kids, sexual abuse, it's not vampire bites. And it's not like The Walking Dead when the zombie bites you, you turn into a zombie. Like, people experience bad things all the time. And they don't do what Skylar De Leon did. And I'll tell you another thing about serial killers that I've discovered, and it's anecdotal because I've done less than a dozen serial killer cases, but I've done enough where the one similarity I've noticed is that they're all, to some degree or another, spoiled. They're spoiled as kids. Ted Bundy, spoiled. Ted Bundy wasn't abused as a kid. Rodney Alcala was not abused as a kid. Skylar, they tried to make it sound like he was abused as a kid. And the best story they could come up with was, there was a big raging party when he was a baby. And, it's on during cross-examination, they put up his mother. You try to be nice to moms, but she's telling this story about how they're having a big party. And little Skylar, and back then his name was John Liberty. He changed it. His real name is John Liberty. He changed it legally to Skylar De Leon to be an actor, right? So that's his stage name, but that's what he goes by legally now. And there's Skylar was, he could have been more than 2, and he fell in the pool. And we were partying so hard, and nobody noticed. And somebody had to jump in and save him. And on cross-examination, it's like, the irony of that, apparently didn't occur to to the defense, or to her as this tearful thing. And it's like, oh, that must have been terrible, right? On cross. It's like, man, was he blue? Yes, he was blue. Was he, did he seem terrified? Yes, when he came through, he seemed terrified. And yeah, did he have an anchor tied to him? Like, who would know better what it's like to friggin' drown if he's almost drowned? Who would know better how awful that is? So yeah, he might have had some experience as a kid, but why in God's green earth would that give him some sort of license or mitigate him doing that to another innocent human being who had a family who loved him? It's like and he was a surfer. Like every surfer, I'm a surfer, I've surfed my whole life. Like a hole down is terrifying. Everybody who's surfed enough knows that when you are underwater and there's waves crashing on you or your leash is hung up, it is terrifying. Skylar knew what that felt like subjectively, and he did it anyway. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's that thing. In my experience, Andrew Urdialis was spoiled as a kid. That's another one of my serial killers. Like the vast majority of them, they're not abused, they're not broken, they're entitled, and they get off on it. They like it, and they enjoy inflicting human suffering. And you know what? On one hand, we could, people could write dissertations about it, what motivates them. On the other hand, I don't care. If they're as an adult where there's nothing wrong, their moral compasses are not broken. They know it's wrong. They just don't care. They're going to do it. They're going to get away with it. And their ego, their megalomania, whatever it is, they like to, a lot of these guys like to murder women and rape them and murder them. That's what gets them off. And their sexual pleasure is more important than the life of their victims or the suffering of their families. And those are the same people that George Gascon is trying to get back out on the street.
Matt, we talked about a lot of cases here on this episode, and hopefully we can make this answer brief. I'm not sure if you can, but
sorry, I know I'm rambling, guys. I'm sorry.
No, it's awesome. I love your stories. It's you're putting us right there. But in all the cases you've tried and all the cases you've dealt with, is there one that still keeps you up at night? That while you're out there paddling out, you might think of it? Or when you're getting coffee in the morning, something reminds you of it. Is there that one case for you?
You know what? I hate to say this. All of those cases are like that for me. I tried I think I tried 52 cases after I went into the homicide unit, and I think about them all. And I probably walked about 100 murder scenes or so in the 17 years I was there, and I still think about all those. It's I think if you're asking me the most haunting case I ever prosecuted, certainly among the worst would be D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. That guy, he would break into homes ahead of time and find a weapon in the home and unload it because he got off on the terror of a man pointing a gun at him at dry firing. He raped a woman in Sacramento who went through classic rape trauma response and wound up moving, and he tracked her down and raped her again. He would murder the husbands in front of the wives. He would put dinner plates on men and say, if I hear any of the plate, as he was raping the wives, if I hear any of the plates crash, I'm going to kill your wife. There was a one in Sacramento where he raped a woman, and she said, I've just been raped. And there was this young Air Force officer who's out walking his dog with his wife in Sacramento, like late summer day, and that man just raped me, a heroic young kid like he was, gave chase. And D'Angelo got sick of running, and he stopped, pulled the gun out, killed him, and then being D'Angelo, he then chased the wife down and killed her too. He is haunting. And I'll tell you what, Todd Spitzer decided to give him LWOP, life without possibility of parole, instead of secret death penalty, which is a decision that I was always against. That's one that symbolically, there's a lot of discovery. It would have taken a long time. As the Orange County prosecutor on that case, I believe that is one that was worth the death penalty. I don't think that we should have given that guy anything that he wanted. The other elected district attorneys who were involved in that case, because he did it all over the state, I have no problem with any of them. In fact, a lot of them I really have a tremendous amount of respect for. I think Todd gave away the store on that, in my opinion. And that case disturbs me, and the disposition on that, frankly, also disturbs me.
Yeah, I think everybody feels that same way after all the details came out. about everything. Now, I want to lighten the mood for just a second, if that's okay.
Okay.
You talked about surfing. You talked a little bit about your struggles in dating life. But is there one thing that people would be shocked to know about you?
Oh, gosh. Okay. One thing that people would be shocked to know about me. Well, whenever I'm in trial, I cannot somehow manage to keep my keys, my wallet, and my sunglasses in one place at one time. And some of my greatest hits, as my old paralegal used to say, the struggle is real. And I lost my wallet inside my house, and I put it in my freezer. And I don't mean it fell. I mean, in my absent-minded professor brain, I put it right next to the frozen peas, and I couldn't find it for days. And there's those old commercials. This is your brain on drugs. That's my brain on trial. I'm ultimately utterly worthless. Somehow, despite myself, I've managed to have some success in courtrooms. But yeah, the behind the scenes, how the sausage is actually made is not pretty.
And the best part about being good friends with the legendary Matt Murphy is you can tattle on him for all of the ladies obsessed, and there's so many. Matt doesn't know how to cook. And Kelly, I witnessed firsthand decorations in his oven.
Look, it's just such a convenient storage place if you're not using it. Like the tree is there. You got to get rid of it. Rather than going all the way to the garage with the Christmas ornaments, if it's not being used, it's like a drawer.
You had decorations, I think it was Halloween, in the oven. And ramen noodle.
In my defense, it was Halloween and Christmas. So, yeah, it was in the oven. I can't believe you saw that.
Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Your stories, your life that you've lived, everything you do, it's something I think should be highlighted as much as possible. People have no understanding of what truly you do and how you change the world and people's lives and fight the good fight. So thank you for coming on and sharing everything with us.
Well, this was fun, guys. And listen, I want to thank you for being that, being that outlet that hopefully people will use to learn about some of these issues and educate themselves just beyond what they might read in a local newspaper. And that's, I think that you two are absolutely a part of the solution on all this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Follow Killer Jeans on Facebook and on Instagram. It's at Killer Jeans, the podcast.
Also, be sure to like and subscribe to Killer Jeans on Podcast One, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And together we host a weekly true crime podcast called The Prosecutors.
In every episode, we bring our unique perspective as full-time prosecutors to the most famous and debated true crime mysteries. Whether it's Maura Murray, Scott Peterson, or the Delphi murders, Brett and I dig deep to bring you details you won't hear anywhere else.
Our podcast is about more than just a story. We will walk you through the legal problems lurking behind every case, breaking down the complexities of the criminal justice system with humor and a personal touch. And it's not just true crime. We bring the same training and approach we've learned as prosecutors to classic mysteries like the Dyatlov Pass incident and the ghost ship Mary Celeste.
So if you're looking for a true crime podcast with a different point of view, The Prosecutors is the one for you. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.